Well, moving on to the war-torn Gaza, where Israeli forces have encircled the territory's largest Jabalia refugee camp. Israeli military claims the camp in the north of Gaza was being used as a Hamas base. The Israeli army says its forces are moving deeper into the refugee camp. The army also says it's taken control of the military post from which Hamas had staged attacks. It also says it has seized a Hamas command and control center and found observation and control materials, weapons and maps. This as Israel continues its bombardment of southern Gaza, including the city of Khan Yunis, which has been partially evacuated. Israeli tanks and armored vehicles were approaching the city from the east. The IDF said that the main road leading there from the north constituted a battlefield. And UNICEF and other UN agencies have now said there are no safe zones anywhere in Gaza as Israel expands its operations in the south. United Nations warned that it is now impossible to create any so-called safe zones for civilians to avoid Israeli bombing campaign.
طبعا زي ما انت شايف هنا كله زحمة ازدحام الناس طبعا صارت تولع نار لما تطبخ وهيك. القصف كله صار يأثر على البيئة، حتى توليع الدخان هذا كلياته النار بيأثر على البيئة. زحمة الناس برضو بتأثر على البيئة وتنشر الأمراض. كله طلع انت كيف البيئة حواليك هنا كلياته حاجة كمان لا تصلح للسكن خالص. كلياته هذا هيأثر على البيئة ويأثر على السكان ويأثر على المجتمع ككل، وغالبا هذه الأزمة راح تتصدر للخارج.
And Israeli operations are now active in all of Gaza at the moment. In the latest, Israel says it has taken control of more Hamas posts in northern Gaza. However, the Israeli military has acknowledged that moving ahead with the second stage in the war will be difficult. Keeping up pressure on Hamas, France has announced it is freezing the assets of Yahya Sinwar as part of the new wave of sanctions, and according to a decree published in the official journal, Sinwar's funds and economic resources will be frozen 6 months from 5th of December. And well, for the very latest on the war in Gaza, my colleague Jody Cohen sent us this report.
Behind me are 137 chairs representing the 137 hostages still remaining in Gaza. Israel says it wants to return all of the hostages and also needs to ensure that Hamas can't carry out a 7th of October style attack again, which Hamas has said it intends to do. Now, Hamas has said that the death toll in Gaza is over 15,000, and the Israel Defense Forces have now said that more than 5,000 of those are Hamas terrorists and that Hamas hides behind civilian shields. So the ratio of civilian to Hamas deaths appears to be 2 to 1. I spoke to Colonel Richard Kemp, who was in charge of the British forces in Afghanistan earlier, and he says that that ratio is actually better than the Western forces in Afghanistan and Iraq. Nonetheless, there's still concern for every civilian life lost and also for the number of people having to evacuate their homes now in southern Gaza. The IDF has published and printed a map showing hundreds of different zones so it can specifically tell people where the fighting is going to be in order to try and minimise civilian casualties and minimise the number of people having to evacuate. The White House spokesperson John Kirby has said that Israel is making an effort to protect civilians and that not many armies publish in advance where they're going to be striking. And a US team is currently in Israel to discuss these issues and also issues like restoration, governance and security for when the war does finally end. This is Jodie Cohen for WION World is One.
And WION correspondent Susan Tehrani caught up with Gilad Erdan, Israel's permanent representative at the United Nations. Erdan slammed the UN Human Rights Council's calls to investigate sexual violence against Israel women as biased. Erdan further called the UNHCR an anti-Semitic body, which is nothing more than a joke. Take a look.
What do you want the United Nations to do in this regard? Would their investigation be sufficient enough for you?
Their call to investigate is a joke because they called a biased anti-Semitic body that was established by the Human Rights Council, and we know who sits on the Human Rights Councils, countries like Cuba, Venezuela, sometimes Pakistan, even Iran. These are the countries that are members of the Human Rights Council. They established an anti-Semitic commission of inquiry against Israel 2 years ago, and this is the committee that UN Women called for that will conduct the investigation. It's nothing more than a joke. I called to investigate UN Women for abandoning Israeli women, for not standing for the values that they should preserve and maintain. We expect the UN leadership and first and foremost the Secretary General to condemn Hamas, and send a clear message to the people of Gaza that everything that is happening right now in Gaza is only under the responsibility of Hamas. They should be held accountable for the situation because they are being controlled, they are being ruled by terrorists, by people who oppress women, by people who embed their terrorist infrastructure under and within civilian facilities, inside schools. They store weapons and missiles inside schools, underneath hospitals. That's their standards, and the UN is silent.
Ambassador, thank you very much for speaking to us.
Thank you very much.